Добрий день, друзі.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Ukraine Media Center continues working for you, and now I'd like to introduce in our studio Yevhen Kramarenko, head of the State Agency for the Management of the Exclusion Zone, and we'll discuss with Yevhen the current situation in the area of Chernobyl nuclear power plant and consequences of its temporary occupation by the Russian military. You're welcome. Yevhen, could you please tell us about the consequences, and then how is it going about restoration of normal operations? Thank you. You know, for almost 1 month, we refrained from speaking in public because the territory of the exclusion zone was occupied by the enemy, and we have our personnel there. We had our communication channels of which the invaders were unaware, and there was a lot of valuable information, and so we did not speak much because there was a special situation. Now we can share some information about what was happening during the occupation and now when we returned there. First of all, I would like to say that this is the first time ever worldwide that there were tanks and nuclear power plant aircraft flying over that power plant, ammo in that nuclear power plant. In Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the occupiers, the invaders, first of all, arranged their stuff, and they brought about 50 heavy vehicles to its territory. They had their command center in the nuclear power plant and in the sanitary facility, also in the area of that power plant. They placed about 1,000 their servicemen who remained there all the time. We called more than once on our own and through a state regulator, nuclear regulator. We called the International Atomic Energy Agency for them to somehow force the aggressor to leave the dangerous facilities in the exclusion zone, and it was not in vain. Mr. Grossi finally visited the Ukraine, and I hope that his efforts also contributed to the fact that the occupiers left nuclear power plant in Chernobyl. We don't know all the details, but still. Also, everybody is interested in the situation about so-called Red Forest. I'd like to tell you that the whole territory of the exclusion zone is contaminated to some extent. That's why it's fenced. That's why there is a special mode of operation one has to comply with when staying in that exclusion zone. However, the occupiers made their trenches in many places, so they made trenches, shelters for their big vehicles, and they even, as we saw, they even created their kitchens underground, sort of tents and fortifications, and one of those fortified positions was near the place where radioactive waste was temporarily placed, so-called Red Forest, where the level of radiation was among the highest in the whole exclusion zone. And when being there, the invaders were breathing with that dust, and they were active physically, so they would breathe more actively, and they inhaled those radionuclides. So, you know, to understand the exact dose that they got, you have to examine the person in medical facility, but we believe that very soon they will feel the consequences of that radiation that they received within the territory of the exclusion zone. And some of them would feel it in months, some of them in years, but anyway, all that personnel which has been there will feel it. Also, there are heavy vehicles, they were moving on field roads in the exclusion zone in many places, and those cars and trucks and people were moving radionuclides with them, and they would raise dust, they would inhale it, and all the other personnel would also feel the consequences. Now about people. People are most important to us. Most of our personnel of the exclusion zone, even before that aggression, when there was already a lot of vehicles moving, we removed most of our personnel from the exclusion zone. And on the 24th of February, there were only people we needed to maintain the activities there, and we stopped all the production activities there, and those nuclear power plant staff was supporting the power plant, and there were also security guards guarding our radioactive facilities, Vector, Borykivka, and centralized storage of spent nuclear fuel, which is also which is being constructed by Energatom and which is also guarded. Those people didn't manage to leave the exclusion zone, and then they stayed there. So in Chernobyl nuclear power plant we had about 103 people of our staff, and in Chernobyl there was about 40 people on territory of that exclusion zone. After some time we managed to replace personnel using waterways, and they were replaced by 46 people who continued working under that occupation. Also, our staff working in the exclusion zone turned out to be residents of occupied territories. About 500 people were under occupation in Hostomel, Ivankiv, Pribylske, Narodiche. About 2,500 of our people were later under enemy's occupation in the city of Slavutich. And not only people who stayed in the exclusion zone were under those war conditions, but all of them have seen the worst side of that aggression. Among our employees, we have 5 people who died, but they did not die in the exclusion zone. They died in those other occupied regions, occupied locations. And 4 people have been captured. They were in the occupied territories, they were in the territorial defense, and they have been captured, and with other prisoners of war they have been moved somewhere, and we are unaware of their location at the moment and their fate. What we found when we entered the exclusion zone, first of all, everything has been stolen. Cars and trucks have been dismantled and broken by tanks. Most of cars and trucks, most of vehicles are not there. And according to GPS sensors that we have in our cars and trucks, we see that they are moving now in the Republic of Belarus and Russian Federation. Many vehicles which we don't own, but they have been stolen from occupied territories, we find them in the exclusion zone now, and they have been destroyed. We just find those destroyed cars and trucks there. Also, we have been informed by employees who stayed in the exclusion zone that when Russians withdrew on the 31st, 5 days before that, there was about 10,000 vehicles passing there, and every second car and truck had Ukrainian number plates. Those included both big cargo trucks and cars taken from our people or from our companies, property like taken, stolen from our people and companies. What's going on in the exclusion zone now? Now we have been relaunching our activities in the new conditions, when our offices and our property has been damaged and stolen. Jointly with the Ministry of Environment, We have been developing plans of restoration of our operations. We understand that the company will not be able to work in the way it used to work. So now we are trying to develop a plan of a restoration of radioactive waste management in the exclusion zone. Also, now we have to be ready for new aggression. Currently, the territory of the exclusion zone is closed, and we have been trying to bring the minimum number of people there in order to restore the security guards activities, security guards operations and infrastructure. And we don't restore the whole operations in the exclusion zone. First of all, there are no communications, there's no electricity supply, and there are Ukrainian armed forces which also set their terms which we have to comply with. First of all, because there are still a lot of mines in the forests, and our employees keep hearing explode, and all visits are only accompanied by the armed forces of Ukraine and the national police when our employees come there. Now about restoring our activities. We have to completely review the security of our nuclear facilities. We have to strengthen the physical protection, physical security, and jointly with uniformed agencies, we have to develop a security system to avoid in the future any event similar to what we had now. That's briefly it. Yevhen, could you please tell us, is our understanding correct that at the moment the situation and the radiation level is safe in the exclusion zone? So basically, your employees have managed to keep situation under control. Is this the case? First of all, until now, our automated system for monitoring of the exclusion zone doesn't work yet because the servers disappeared which processed that information. And second, until we get the electricity supply and until our employees are allowed by the armed forces of Ukraine to visit those radiation monitoring points, we will not understand the damage done. We have restored dosimetry in Detyatki and Lviv checkpoints, and before visiting the premises and workplaces, our people check the situation in the offices and in the station, but what the situation in the whole exclusion zone. We'll understand it when all sensors work again, or a longer option, if they're really heavily damaged and if it'll take a long time, then we'll have to have our people coming there and checking manually whether we have any radiation accident or not. So we cannot say for sure now whether it's completely safe. Is our understanding correct that those servers that disappeared is also a result of those invaders, occupiers who stole that equipment? Well, they took a lot of things from there. Say from hostels, they even took personal chattels. For some reason, they took almost all clothes of our employees, including those uniforms our staff used there in the exclusion zone. We don't have that footwear there. All those computers have been dismantled, and in most of them, there are no hard disk drives and no memory anymore. So computers are mostly lacking those components. All the server equipment. Say, from some hostels, they even took mattresses and kitchenware, furniture, tables, chairs, microwave ovens, coffee makers. We cannot even establish everything because, we don't allow we cannot, if all our staff would enter there, they would look and they say an accountant would check what is missing from her workplace, and those living in the hostels would see what is missing there. Now we can't even fully understand. Thank you. Dear journalists, you are welcome to ask your questions, but please use the microphone.
Hi. Thanks very much. It's Luke Harding from the Guardian newspaper. A couple of questions. Can you describe what life was like under Russian occupation? How did the Russian soldiers and your staff live side by side for nearly a month? That's question one. Question two, do you have any information about what happened to the 169 members of the Ukraine National Guard who were taken away by Russian forces and who have disappeared? And lastly, I was part of a group of journalists on a press tour who went to the Exclusion zone yesterday, and we were not allowed inside. We spent all day waiting at the control point. Do you know why that happened?
Let me start with your last question. You are not allowed, although it was agreed upon with the armed forces, with the central command of the armed forces, but there locally it turned out that troops were moving there, and there locally they prohibited right there on that day to visit the exclusion zone. Currently we have been maintaining communication with Ministry of Defense, and we'll do it in such a way that next time it would not happen. So, there was just some sort of mess. Then the next question about our employees in the exclusion zone. Well, first of all, we would split them into two categories. First of those is staff of nuclear power plant, Chernobyl nuclear power plant, maintaining security at the nuclear site. They stayed there for a long time. The first shift was 25 days, and the second one was more than 2 weeks under occupation. And that's about, it was difficult psychologically because, their shift had to be 1 day, not such a long time. They were prohibited from leaving their workplaces, and they were residing there, or they were sleeping under supervision. They had to get permission to move. About physical violence, I haven't heard about any physical violence, although now law enforcement speaks with them in the city of Slavutich in order to see the whole picture, so it may be that something will be found, but I haven't heard. What about access to food, whether those employees had access to food? Yes, there was access to food. Chernobyl nuclear power plant provides food to its employees independently, and by that time there were some reserves of food previously purchased, and we were providing food to them, and there were cooks who were cooking there. So, Chernobyl power plant provided food to that personnel, and there was enough food for that time. Second category of employees is those employees of our other entities other than Chernobyl nuclear power plant, those who remained in the city of Chernobyl, and also there was a unit of the main Directorate of State Emergency Service for Kyiv Oblast, and all of them continued to work there during all that time. They were allowed to extinguish fires in the exclusion zone under Russian supervision. That stuff, those employees of other entities did not operate. They were prohibited from leaving the city of Chernobyl. They were checked, and those employees, they were lacking food. Although in a centralized way, that centralized radioactive waste management entity provided food for their employees. There was food in that exclusion zone, but after some period of time, there was a shortage of that food. There were some facts. Now again, the law enforcement agencies have been investigating. There were some facts were not our employees, but those from other organizations. Our contractors were scorned. There was some derision, some torture. Now about the National Guard. Yeah, National Guard. When there was the first duty shift, after 25 days of staying in their places under occupation, there were 46 volunteers, 46 employees who volunteered to replace their colleagues. And one of them was a woman who was a woman and a mother. She was a wife of a National Guard member and mother of another National Guard member. And both those National Guard members were there at Chernobyl power plant. And we were told by employees that on the 31st, about lunchtime, they were all gathered in the conference room. They were counted. They tied somehow their hands, not by handcuffs, but in some other way. They were put into cars and they were taken from there. And we are unaware of their current location. You better ask the Ministry of Internal Affairs, who may have information. Thank you. Any more questions? Friends, you're welcome.
Thank you. Last question. Can you just be clear as to whether the crazy radioactive dust caused by Russian soldiers, by Russian occupation, is now a health hazard to people living on the edge of the exclusion zone, to the civilian population? Are they at any risk? Yes or no?
First of all, we have to check the whole exclusion zone to investigate. But the dust raised there, you know, they were breathing, those Russians were breathing the dust, and after some short time the dust would come down and it's still there in the exclusion zone. But we'll investigate into this issue after complete renewal of our activities in the exclusion zone. Thank you, Yevhen. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for finding time to answer all those important questions raised here, dear friends. Thank you for staying with us. I'd like to remind you that at 3 p.m. in our studio we will have the spokesperson of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Alexander Matysyanek. Colonel Matysyanek will tell us about the situation on the front lines at the moment. Please stay with us. Thank you.